Boeing asked me and my colleague, who's been with me on all of these funds, Camille Byros, the two of us, and we were asked to design and administer an independent fund. We would decide who's eligible. We would decide how to distribute the funds over what period of time. And over a relatively quick 45 days, we developed the program. And yesterday, we began to send out the claim packets.
And just to be clear, victims will get money and compensation, but they're not prevented from suing, because oftentimes that's been the way these programs have been structured.
That's right. BP or GM, they had to waive their right to sue. That's not this program.
Right.
This program, I'm instructed, this is $50 million to be distributed, has nothing to do with the litigation in Chicago or elsewhere. This is Boeing's offer to these families as a gift.
Does Boeing say to you, this is how we want to do it, or do you say to Boeing, this is how I think you should do it?
The latter. Camille Byros and I sit down with Boeing and say, if you're going to distribute these funds, for example, don't start asking families how much they earned in Rwanda or Somalia. People died from 35 foreign countries on these two plane crash accidents. Right. So we advised Boeing, and Boeing said, you know, you guys know how to do this. You do it. You decide. We'll provide the money.
Ken, you've done this so many times that it still comes down to the grim reality of trying to figure out how you value a life. What do you do to someone who had a family with a lot of kids? What do you do to someone who maybe was young and had a mother or a father that they may have been supporting? How do you figure that out? How do you determine it?
The same way courts and juries and judges and lawyers do every day in this country. Usually, it is based on financial need and how much you would have earned in a work life but for the accident. Here, simple. 50 million, 346 victims equals about $144,500, whether you were a lawyer in Rwanda or a worker or whatever.
How do you figure out who to pay if it's not clear cut? If it wasn't someone who was married, had a spouse, had children, something along those lines. So there's a lot of complicated family structures. It's
a real challenge. In a country, let's just take Morocco. Well, what is the local estate law in Morocco? If somebody dies who's a resident citizen of Morocco, what does the law of Morocco say about survivors and wives and children and siblings? So we've had to go back in each of these 35 countries, and we have had to learn, what does the estate law say? If somebody dies on these planes from Indonesia, what does the law of Indonesia say?
Even if it says it goes to the closest male relative, who may be a brother who's just estranged from it, and not to the wife or the girlfriend who had the child or something?
Those are the issues. In India, we learned, because the pilot was from India, that the mother of the victim is entitled to like half of the estate. So for 35 countries, this was the challenge. In the United States, we know the law in each state, but when you're talking about foreign nations, and how do you make sure that $144,000 to a family in Rwanda, how do you make sure they're going to get the money?
Right.
Even if you decide, here's the person entitled to get the money, how do we protect those funds? And Boeing has been terrific in saying to Camille and myself, you guys figure this out. We'll give you the money. You will be the ones who can overcome these challenges.
Phil, you had a question, too?
Hi, Ken. Phil LeBeau here. You and I talked extensively when the GM ignition switch crisis was going on and the compensation fund was established there. In that case, I know that you and Camille both talked with a number of the families of victims and victims themselves who were not killed in ignition switch accidents. Did you talk to the families in this case with Boeing? And if you did, what did you hear back from them? Because all we've heard so far is some congressional testimony from a few relatives who have said, look, this looks like a PR stunt to us. We don't think that Boeing has done enough or has been forthcoming enough. What have you heard back from the victims' families?
We've talked to a few families, and we're continuing to meet with groups of families. Later this month in Washington, a whole group is coming to see Camille and I from Indonesia. But what you learn from the families in a case like this, skepticism. What does all this mean? We're getting all this money. We can continue to litigate with our lawyers in Chicago. This is separate. There are no strings, but and I think like the 9/11 fund, Phil, you'll recall, it took a while for families to get a comfort level that this is on the up and up. And what we're trying to do with these families and the lawyers representing these families in all of these foreign countries is explain to them there really are no hidden agendas here. We're trying to get the money out. Boeing is pushing to get this money out separate from the litigation. There's a deadline of December 31st to get the claims in and process the claims, get the money out. So we're learning from the families, very emotional, as usual, but we're trying to explain to them that this really is money that will have no impact on their right to go to court or seek other redress.
Ken, one quick follow-up question, and then I know Andrew and Becky have a few more. But my last question would be this. Not to be indelicate about this, but there are more than a few people who have said if these crashes had happened in the United States, the way this would play out would be far different, that the compensation fund would be far greater, and that there would be a bigger price to pay, if you will, for Boeing. Do you believe that's the case? Do you believe that there would be a greater amount per victim, so to speak, if these crashes had happened in the United States?
Absolutely not. Don't forget, this is the key, mentioned at the outset. These funds, $144,500, have nothing to do with families or lawyers seeking additional compensation in the courtroom. Just like in 9/11, you'll recall, people could opt out of our program and litigate if they want. General Motors, you covered it, Phil. If people didn't want this, they could go litigate. Here, this is money that is separate and apart. I don't think it would make any difference if they were American citizens. It is a parallel program that allows family members to accept these funds and continue to go to court in Chicago and seek vastly additional sums if they want to do so.
Okay. Ken, we got to leave the conversation there. We are very appreciative of you being here.